Hi, everybody. So as a marketer, and especially a marketer for a job site, I spend a lot of time thinking about how people choose where they're going to work and how organizations can get the right people to think of their organization when they're looking for a job. It's actually an area that has not that much research. And this intersection of consumer brands and employer brands is an area where most marketing organizations are pretty weak. It often falls in this weird spot between human resources and the traditional marketing department. We're going to share today research that is brand new and we've never shared before. We did it all through a fair amount of surveys and some of our own data. And for all of it, we included people in the US and Canada to get a mix that felt right for the audience here. And we're going to leave time at the end for questions and for you to share your story. So I look forward to your thoughts on this. So what is it that many cult brands have in common? I love this picture. I assume some of you know what workplace this is? It's Zappos, yeah. It's pretty distinctly recognizable. And then who's this? That's Google and their conference bikes. I'm always happy to see that they're very safe and they all wear helmets, although the thing looks pretty indestructible and unlikely to tip over. We've got Fender and the guitars. They were one of the cult brands. We've got Herb Kelleher. Sometimes great cult brands need not just good cult workers, but also great cult leaders. And here he is with the former CEO of American Airlines, pretty much hamming it up, as he often did. And it's because of that that you have such amazing Southwest employees. This is one of the really regular Southwest tricks where the flight attendant gets into the overhead bin to scare customers and surprise them as they get on the plane. And so that was the setup for that one. Cult brands obviously are built on cult-like workforces. So one of the first things that I was curious about was, I just wanted to ask people, where do you want to work? And so we asked 1,000 people in the US and Canada, if you could work anywhere, where would it be? And we got 200 different answers, which I thought was a pretty good sign. We also asked for what company, which was a mistake because there's a lot of people who want to work for government, and they fortunately corrected us. But here's what we found. So number 10, 3% of people said they wanted to work for Coca-Cola. Next up, 3% said they wanted to work for Walmart. 3% said Tesla. 4% said Sony. 4% said government. Which is great. And I bet more would have if we were smarter about the way we phrased that question. 6% said Microsoft. 11% said Disney. 17% said Apple. 18% said Amazon. And then who's left? Who was number one? Yeah. 51% said Google. That to me actually was kind of terrifying. That's a lot of people. That level of dominance as an employer brand, that's unprecedented. So here's the list. If you could work anywhere, what company would it be? Now, the thing that was interesting to me as a marketer is that I looked at this list and one thing was obvious, and that is that 6 of these are on the list of the top 10 most valuable brands in the US. There's also, if I look at the top 5 brands in the US, there's one that's missing from this list. Who's missing? Facebook. God, you guys are good at this. Facebook is missing. And so we actually looked at the data. I don't know if many of you are marketers, if you use Brand Index, which is YouGov. We use it to measure awareness on a daily basis in all the countries that we operate. But they have a really neat feature where you can look at your employer reputation, and you can look at it over time and do that for any brand. And so we pulled up Facebook on that, and you can see actually the drop in Facebook as a trusted employer that started with Cambridge Analytica. And it really does show how brands and employer brands are really intertwined, and the reputation is impossible to separate. So this brought us to 3 questions. Number 1, what's the role of brand in job seeker career decisions, and whether that's employer brand or consumer brand? Number 2, these are really important decisions. How do job seekers approach these choices? Do they make career choices the way they make other choices, or is it different? I genuinely, when we started this, didn't know the answer. I'm not sure I fully figured it out, but we're getting closer. And then number 3, what can companies do to build a brand that attracts great talent? Because that's what we all want to do. We're going to talk through all 3 of these things. So let's start with the beginning. I like to start every discussion of brand with a discussion about the human brain, because it's really important context for the way we think about how decisions are made, and it's, I think, the most critical thing for any marketer to know. So by age 21, you permanently stored more than 100 times the content of the entire Encyclopedia Britannica. Is there anyone here who remembers what Encyclopedia Britannica was? And this includes everything you've ever come across or experienced. It's images, it's feelings, it's memories, emotions, thoughts, sounds, smells, sensations of touch. And each time you make a decision, you sort through all of this information. And you're pulling what's relevant from more than 100 million pieces of information that are stored in your head. Now, we've got 2 machines for doing this, one that is conscious and one that is subconscious. Now, subconscious brain, it's pretty powerful. It can process 11 million bits of information per second. And we're not aware, obviously, of any of that happening. It all happens in the background. All of the thinking we are aware of happens in our conscious brain. Anyone know how many bits of information per second the conscious brain can process? What can it do? I'll give you a hint. It starts with a 4. The next digit's 0, and that's it, 40 bits per second. So our subconscious brain is 275,000 times faster than our conscious brain. That's like having a car that goes 100 miles per hour, which is our subconscious one, and then the conscious brain, it goes 23 inches per hour. It's a pretty big difference. And as a result, almost all of our decision-making happens subconsciously, whether we know it or not. 95% of decision-making, and just 5% of decision-making is conscious. This is why advertising, consideration are really, really important in thinking about how people make decisions. So according to McKinsey & Company, the very expensive consulting firm, when people make a purchasing decision, they can do one of 2 things. They can choose a brand that comes to mind, and that happens about 70% of the time. Something that was in their initial consideration set, whether that's buying toothpaste or a credit card or a car or whatever it might be. And 31% of the time, they choose a new brand. Someone sneaks in there, and it wasn't what they originally thought of, but through some sort of intervention, they get someone to pick their thing. Now, career decisions are actually really different than typical purchasing decisions. We wanted to calculate that same number, and so we did. So when job seekers make a career decision, they can do 2 things. They can target specific employers, say, I am going to work for Apple, or they can focus on the job or location and a pragmatic set of things, regardless of employer. And it turns out that 22% of the time, they target specific employers. 4 out of 5 times, they do it really pragmatically, focusing on job or location regardless of employer. And this I found fascinating. Job seekers are open to an incredibly wide variety of employers. Just 14% said they would be unlikely to apply for a job at a company that they've never heard of. That's pretty open-minded. So that was fascinating. So how do people make career decisions? Let's talk about that. So here's a bunch of kind of basics that frame, first of all, people looking for jobs and job search. So there's all these myths in the world about most people being passive and a very small number of people looking for a job. But the fact of the matter is that when you look at, first of all, people who got a job and you asked them what they did before getting that job, 90% of people were really active in that job search. And at any given time, 79% of job seekers, 79% of people in the labor force in the US and Canada say that they're either actively looking or open to a new job. And those things are very different, but it shows their disposition. 51% of job seekers say they're always looking for a job. So why? What is it that people are looking for in a new job? Number one is, despite what other research says, it's money, and that matters, and that's what gets people to change. 28% is work-life balance, which is incredibly important. 21% is a role that better fits my passions or interests. 20% better workplace. 20% I just needed a job. And 19% I wanted a promotion or growth opportunities. I was interested in that 21%, the passions and interests, and I wondered if there was any generational difference on that. And when we've looked in detail at that number, what we found is that it's actually younger people and older people for whom finding a job that fits their passions and interests is particularly important. And all of the middle of life, it's not. When there's kids and mortgages and things are tighter, people are much more pragmatic in the reasons that drive them to actually look for a job. But it's the details of a job, more so than the company, that determine where people apply. And so we asked people, think about the most recent job to which you applied. Why did you do it? And number one was location. People want to work where they don't have to commute a lot. Number two was salary. Number three was it's the right responsibilities. Number four, work-life balance. It's the same set of stuff. It's not until that bottom one, 22%, the company's reputation as a positive place to work jumped out. So there's this interesting mix of things going on. So we talked a lot about the pragmatic elements, and a lot of this comes from surveys. And we all know from surveys that people are going to overestimate the rational and underestimate the emotional. And so we have some tricks to get that data back as well. So while career decisions are, in fact, pragmatic, we see that brand and reputation do play an important role. 83% of job seekers who applied to a job were in some way familiar with the company's business. So even though most say that they'd be open to it, when they do apply, almost all know who that brand is that they're applying to, even if they've not used that business's products. And then 67% of job seekers say that they like the company's products or services, that they've used them and they've had a good experience before applying to that job. So although job seekers don't admit it, what we see in our data is that brand advertising does impact career decision making. So we can see that job seekers who see an employer brand ad on Indeed are 20% more likely to search for that company and their jobs in the next 30 days, and 55% more likely to apply to one of the sponsored jobs. And so we can only measure on our own platform, but it does show that there is a link between brand awareness and consideration broadly and someone's likelihood to take action to apply to a job. Our data also shows that if we have two jobs that look really similar, and one is from a really well-known brand, and one is from a brand that's much less well-known, the well-known brand is going to be more likely to be clicked on, 22% more likely, in fact. Job seeker perceptions, though, clearly transcend a company's consumer brand. Job seekers understand they may have a brand that's exciting to them and really interesting. They may love the products, but they understand that working there is a discrete dimension in many ways. And so we wanted to figure out where that information comes from and how brands should think about shaping that. So 78% of job seekers shared that a company's workplace reputation, what it's like to work there, was somewhat to very influential on their decision to apply to a job. And so we asked, how did you come to learn about the experiences of employees working at the company? And we got a pretty long list, and I'm not going to go through it all. But the top three things were word of mouth reputation, which is vague, employee reviews online, company pages on employment sites, like Glassdoor and Indeed, the company's own career site, and then a bunch of kind of long tail things that include content, social media, et cetera. Now, when job seekers look for a job, they clearly do their research. 63% of job seekers say that their perception of what it's like to work at the company is influenced by reviews from previous or current employees. And this is a change over the last decade, clearly, as sites like Indeed and Glassdoor have put out reviews on most every business out there in volume. And 80% of job seekers say they read reviews about a prospective employer before forming an opinion about them. I don't know if that's true, but they say it. One thing that is really clear is that negative reviews, especially a series of consistent negative reviews, really do hurt. And it is amazing to look at employers and to look at those reviews and to see how strongly consistent they can be. We asked, which of the following factors would most deter you from accepting a job offer that is a good fit for you, to accept a good job for you? And 59% said reading negative online reviews of the company. 57% said hearing something negative from peers. That was even less than reviews. And 55% seeing that the company's values don't resonate with my own, which I was glad to see. It shows that there is that deeper alignment of purpose, even if it didn't come through in some of the other data. So what do we do? What can companies do to build a brand that attracts great talent? We've got 4 ideas. Action number 1. Let's start by taking a stand with our employer brand. A great employer brand, like any great brand, starts with a story. Here's an example, Lush Cosmetics. They do a great job of, through their brand and their consumer brand and their employer brand, weaving through their championship for the environment, and they lead with that, both on their consumer website and on their employer site, but it's really well integrated. Bell Canada, they focused a lot on developing and implementing mental health practices in the workplace, and then also being a champion of mental health initiatives in their communities, and weaving those together as they form a brand and an employer brand. Spread Fast really focuses on work-life balance and the great things their employees do outside the office. The best employer stories align perfectly with the company's brand. Airbnb is certainly a great example of that from earlier today. Vodafone is one I love. Their brand is positioned around the theme of future optimism and how technology plays a role in transforming society and people's quality of life. And they really link that in to how working at Vodafone is an opportunity to shape society and that future. Employees at organizations with well-aligned employer brands are 9 times more likely as unaligned employer brands to say their organization has a really good reputation. That comes from the agency Weber Shandwick. Now, in the age of reviews, that brand needs to be authentic. Talent Brand Alliance says, talent brand is the honest, keyword honest, story of life as an employee inside your organization as told by the employees in parallel with the company. And so data on this is interesting. We looked at Weber Shandwick research, and they surveyed employees about this. And they asked, what my employer portrays about itself publicly matches what it's like to work there. And only a small percentage of employees agreed. 19% strongly agreed. And 34% agreed. About half were not so sure. This is a great question to ask your own employees as you're trying to figure out if your employer brand is authentic and created in the right way. And then, again, Weber Shandwick, the reputation of your employer is worth its weight in gold, but only if it turns out to truly reflect what it's actually like to work there. So that's 1. Action 2, tell your story in the places that matter most to candidates. And this is really important, but so anticlimactic. The starting point for brand storytelling for people looking for a job is in your company's job descriptions. How many of your organizations have beautiful, amazingly written job descriptions? A couple, nice. Yeah, we do now, good. You know, it's hard. 68% of job seekers say that how well a job description matches their skills, qualifications, and aspirations has the biggest influence over whether or not they'll apply to a job. We see this so deeply in our data on how job descriptions drive the right applies and quality applies. Most job descriptions, technically speaking, suck. They're terrible. Here's one that is really typical, and this is from a financial firm in Toronto, and it just has an amazingly long list of requirements that they expect of the candidate and reveals nothing about what it's like to work at the company or why someone would want to work. Long lists of requirements have multiple effects. One, they don't attract people to your business. They also wind up shifting your candidate pool in really unexpected ways. Women are much less likely to apply to jobs unless they meet everything listed, and men don't hold themselves to that same standard. And so when you have a lot of requirements on job descriptions, you wind up with a pool that is likely to be much more men than women. Getting the art and science of job descriptions right is incredibly important and incredibly hard. Job seekers read between the lines. We asked 500 job seekers who told us they were turned off by a job description why they decided not to apply to a job. And look at these things. It's incredible. 53% said they wouldn't be a good cultural fit. Well, when you look at a lot of job descriptions, it doesn't look like you'd want to work there, so that makes sense. 48% had concerns about the stability of a company, which I find fascinating because no job description says bad things about a company's financial prospects. But we'll look at a couple examples, and it's so easy to read so much into a bad job description. And 40% said their values and beliefs did not align with the company's mission or vision. So let's look at a couple of job descriptions. Here's one that's local. We are a young, hungry, and fast-growing company. We move quickly, work hard, play hard, and are looking for members of our team that want to participate in the engineering of a great organization. This is not a 9 to 5. However, we can promise there are a few places with opportunities for growth or where you will be challenged to learn in more meaningful and exciting ways. It speaks so much about what that environment is and turns off probably more people than it gets excited about those roles. Here's one, looking for millennials in Toronto. They spelled millennials wrong, for one. And also, they're just speaking to one of the 4 generations that are in the workforce. It says a lot about that environment, what their priorities are, what they value, and turns off a lot of people. So what does great look like? I love this one from Sun Life Financial, and they organize their thoughts into what you get, really starting with what's special about the environment, recognition, everyone is a contributor, and what we get, then talking about the things that are important in the candidates that they're going to be screening. Airbnb universally does such a great job at their job descriptions. This is one that I like. It's a little old. This is for a software engineer in Seattle. And at the time, their Seattle software engineering teams were mostly doing internal work. And for software engineers who want to go to Airbnb, they want to work on the really cool product stuff. And this is mostly internal stuff. But the entire first section is examples of work that that team in Seattle has done and the impact that it's had on the company and the world. And that is a great way to draw people in. Make sure, likewise, that you're telling your story beyond job descriptions and the places that people look for jobs. And on job sites is part of that. In 2018, job seekers viewed an Indeed company page to research a company more than 1.5 billion times. And so Indeed, Glassdoor, the other big job sites are where a lot of the information that forms your employee brand originates. Job seekers who visit your Indeed company page are on average 4 times more likely to apply to one of your jobs. And here's an example of a great Indeed company page. This is on Indeed, and it's TD Bank's page. Now, this is going to sound like self-promotion, but these are free. We don't charge you to claim your company page and to make it really speak to job seekers. And so we encourage everyone to really take ownership of that and to do it. It's a great channel. And so they've done a really good job at TD Bank to talk about their company. They've got a video. It talks about their commitment to diversity, opportunities for career growth, but really tells a good story. Salesforce does a great job on this. Ohana is one of their defining tenets of their culture, and it's front and center, and they make it fun. They bring it right onto the site. So finally, use your career site and content to tell a powerful story about your employee experience. And there's some great career sites out there. Shopify, we've read a lot of cover letters over the years. Now it's your turn. We're applying to you. And they start with references from their employees about what it's like to work there. It gives a real feel for what that environment's like. Boston Consulting Group is looking for incredibly talented people, and they focus on the diversity of skills, experience, and backgrounds that can lead to success there, so that many people can see themselves in that career beyond the stereotypes that exist. Action 3, wow job seekers with your candidate experience. Once job seekers are in your hiring process, once they meet you, it's those interactions that define your reputation to them more than anything else. So we asked job seekers, once you've applied at a company, which of the following things build trust? Number 1, the people at the interview show an active interest in me and are familiar with my profile. They treat me like a human being. 53%, the company reviews my application promptly and reaches out. We know the data on this, and most companies don't do that well. 45%, the people I interact with are interested in me as a person and not just my work. People want to feel like a human that is going to become part of a community and that they're being introduced to that community, and a lot of interview processes aren't structured that way. One of the really tough things is that many organizations get more applications than they can handle. And I love the way Trello handles this. They have their recruiting robot, which is a fancy name for an email responder. But the text is great. This is an automatic email sent by a mindless robot to let you know we're absolutely thrilled you'd be interested in working for Trello. We're very honored. It may take a week or 10 days before a developer gets around to reviewing your application. They set very clear expectations. But we will assure you that a real live human being, not an automated computer zapper program, will review your application carefully and only after drinking plenty of coffee and getting lots of sleep and exercise. Yes, you will hear back from us. It's our policy to reply to all applications. You know what? A job seeker who has to wait 10 days at least knows what's happening, and if they get rejected, at least they're going to feel better about that process and not that they were blindly ignored. Johnson & Johnson has an app that lets people track the progress of their application and access content to make them more successful in the process. And you can chat directly to the talent acquisition team and get status immediately. That black hole of submitting an application and not hearing back is the worst thing for job seekers. Things like this are awesome. They're hard to do. And then I love that Mattress Firm sends personal notes to candidates that are handwritten and based on their interests and where they would be a good fit in the organization. And so this is the last action. The core to being a great employer brand is being a great place to work and establishing a trusting employee relationship. George Bratt from Forbes said this well: you get the employee engagement you deserve. If you don't engage with them, they won't engage with you. This is particularly true at moments of truth, starting with how you onboard them. Twitter has an amazing onboarding program, Yes to Desk. It's 75 steps. It lasts a long time. It starts with bringing people to all of the departments that they need to go to. There's a lot of interaction with leadership, which is really impressive. New hires for a long time have had breakfast with the CEO. And then later on, there's a rotating schedule of presentations on projects and happy hours with the senior leadership team for new employees to really get integrated really well. It's impressive. We asked what other things are important, and here were the top 3 things that said drive real trust for employers. 80% said opportunity, wage growth, training, career growth, and work which I find interesting and fulfilling. That fits with a lot of what was discussed this morning. 74% personal empowerment. I know what's going on. I'm part of the planning process. I have a voice in key decision. The culture is values-driven and inclusive. And 67% shared purpose. My employer has a greater purpose, and my job has a meaningful societal impact. So what is the impact of doing these 4 things? Taking a stand with your employer brand, telling the story in the places that matter most to candidates, wowing job seekers with your candidate experience, and establishing a trusting employee relationship. I think that we can all, if we do that, ensure our brands stand out to in-demand talent. We can grow a cult-like workforce that attracts a cult-like consumer following. And as Simon Sinek, who was mentioned earlier today, said, customers will never love a company until the employees love it first. And that is definitely the right starting point. Thanks.
That was wonderful. Thank you. To those of you in the audience, ordinarily we would ask you to submit questions via Twitter under the hashtag GatheringIndeed. Instead, we've got 2 roving mics here today, 1 in each aisle. So please, as you consider your questions, raise your hands nice and high so that our helpers can find you and you can engage directly with Paul. While you're working up the guts to ask a question in front of this audience, I'll get us started with 2, but then I'm going to switch to really boring questions. So it's in your best interest to make sure that
Please help.
you help Paul out here, because otherwise we're all going to fall asleep.
And feel free, too, to share your stories. I think that one of the most interesting things is what you're doing in these areas, kind of where it's owned, the interesting things that you've figured out in this, what your research shows. So would love as much sharing as question answering.
Yeah, bonus points if we get an argument started. So I'll get us started while you guys work up the nerve here. And the question that I have, Paul, is as CMO, you're obviously held accountable to the growth of the organization. How much of your role crosses over into improving, as a marketer, improving the employer brand for Indeed?
Yeah, not enough. I think that for us, like most organizations, we figured out a lot of that, but not all of it. It's one of the reasons why we're doing a lot of this research now to better understand it. We spend a lot of time thinking about our brand globally. We're in 60 countries. We have about 250 million people on Indeed monthly. As a company, we're incredibly mission-driven on helping people get jobs. It's the thing that we obsess about all day long. We work really closely with jointly on employer brand with our HR and talent attraction teams. You know, we're a fast-growing company. I joined 6 years ago when we were a few hundred people. We just passed 8,000. And so, I mean, we have an amazingly capable and well-organized talent attraction team. And that exists within our brand. It's another dimension and facet of our brand. But I think we can do a lot, like most marketing organizations, to be a lot more sophisticated about how we integrate those and make it different layers of the same story.
I think in the past we have had arguments here at the gathering around whose job this is. Is this an HR function? Is it a marketing function? I think probably the answer is it's going to be different from organization to organization. But do you think that the material that you're talking about today is a discipline that marketers around the world, and certainly at this conference, need to grow in order to be able to adapt to the future?
Yeah, and even though I'm a marketer, I really think there's an important role for HR here. I think the authenticity element of employer brand is incredibly important. And the fact of the matter is, in most organizations, it's HR that does the engagement surveys, that has a lot of the data on what people think and what the experience is, and I think the clearest pulse on that. And I think that is the research base. That's where the insights come from. That needs to be really closely connected into your consumer or organization or product brand, but it should be a partnership.
I'm going to ask one more question selfishly because I'm truly curious about one of the things you referenced, and then we'll go to the audience. You alluded to some of the research that's been passed around in the last couple of years about how millennials and now Gen Zs are more interested in aligning with the values of your organization than they are with what they're going to actually get paid or how they're going to be compensated. Are you telling us today that millennials and Gen Zs are not as altruistic as we've been led to believe?
They definitely are until they have kids and a mortgage.
Until they have kids and a mortgage. That's good to know.
But it is an interesting mix of things that, I mean, I do think that there's no doubt that that is a trend and a thing. I think some of the research suggests, and I don't know if this is fully true, that some of that altruism is a privilege, and that for a lot of people, finding the right job and earning enough, if you're earning minimum wage, it's hard, and putting the pieces together of a career for most people is really, really tough. If you're one of the 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 people who went to college or have skills that are really hard to find, you're in one part of the labor market. But for everyone else, it's tough. And for them, that pragmatic fact of what I'm earning and where I'm working and the time I have with the people I love, it matters. Is there still some truth to that research, though? Has there been a shift that you guys have seen over the course of the last several years that there
people are more conscious about who's employing them? Like, they still need to be compensated?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've seen, we don't have full-time series on all of that data, but what we can see now is that yes, younger people are more looking for work that's more fulfilling and that has a strong purpose, but that it looks exactly the same for people who are older, for people who are over 60 and who are in the later years of their career. That data is really, really similar. So it's part generational, and I'm sure there are other layers to it that are more generational, but I think it's also part life circumstance. That's at least what the data suggests to us.
Very interesting. Boring questions are next. So does anybody have any questions from the audience?
Yes, there it is.
Gotcha.
Hey there, ready for a boring question? Is that what you asked?
Yeah, where are you, just so I can see?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh yeah, great, I got you.
Yeah, I'm Dennis Hahn. I'm with Liquid Agency. We're a brand culture agency in the United States. My question, you mentioned employer brand quite a few times, and I'm just curious how you differentiate an employer brand from the actual consumer brand, and if it actually does make a difference.
Yeah, this is the heart of the question and what we're trying to figure out. I mean, for me, the employer brand is an understanding of expectations of what it is like to work for a particular company. It is the brand promise of the employee experience. It's very clearly intertwined with consumer brand for consumer companies. There's obviously a lot of non-consumer companies that hire out there as well, and they don't get that same lift. But there is a separation in people's mind of the thing that I like that the company makes and what the actual experience is working in that organization. And so to me, it's those separate channels are those two brands, and they're absolutely interlinked and connected. But figuring out, in particular for me, what really drives that understanding of what it's like to work for an organization, where that information comes from, what narrative is in people's heads, that is a really interesting question. And the better, more as marketers and as companies we can think about telling a story that's really authentic about what is special about our workplace and the promise that we want to make to potential future employees about that experience is a really interesting starting point for that has not gotten enough attention in most organizations.
Thanks for the question. Anybody else in the audience?
Yes, hi. There's that sound. That's loud. First of all, I want to thank you for putting together such a thoughtful, well-curated, accessible presentation. It was delivered brilliantly, and the information was so on point, and I know that's an extremely difficult thing to do, so I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
Mike.
Thank you.
And just as a side note, I wish there were more people who rehearse presentations, as you obviously did. It's fantastic.
There's a fair amount of that today.
I'm sure there was. My question is about something you did mention in the presentation, which is what is the role of LinkedIn with respect to the overall research process that you're finding, be it generationally, but how that's connected to the job sites themselves? So the role of LinkedIn in the job search process.
That's a good question. You know, I don't have much visibility into that, and I don't think I can speak to that as clearly. You know, I mean, we've done survey research that shows that, I mean, certainly for you know, especially executive and very high-end white collar, that there is definitely an impact from participation in work social networks like LinkedIn, but I don't know how that's changing or evolving over time or what the broader impact is. I mean, we saw some of the data on where impressions come from of what it's like to work, and social networks were on those lists, and people are speaking about LinkedIn on those, but they were lower down the list. They were there with workplace awards and content put out from employers and other things. It was below a lot of the core stuff around the job search process that ranked higher up. I'm sure it's different for different audiences as well.
My clock is telling me that we're at time. If somebody wanted access to the troves of data that you guys have as an organization, is there a way for people in this room to access?
Yeah, I'm glad for us to share materials. If people come up and give us some way, if there's an email address that winds up in my hand, a presentation will wind up in that person's email inbox.
Perfect.
That's the magic we can make happen.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for making that available, and thank you for sharing these insights with us.
Yeah, well, thanks for having us. Great to be here.